Chapter 1, of the Subterranean Inhabitants. These Siths, or fairies, they call Sleep Maeve, or the good people, it would seem, to prevent the dint of their ill attempts, for the Irish used to bless all they fear harm of and are said to be of a middle nature betwixt man and angel, as were demons thought to be of old, of intelligent fluidious spirits, and light-changeable bodies, like those called astral, somewhat of the nature of a condensed cloud, and best seen in twilight. These bodies are so pliable through the subtlety of the spirits that agitate them, that they can make them appear or disappear at pleasure. Some have bodies or vehicles so spongious, thin, and delicate, that they are used by only sucking into some fine spirituous liquors, that pierce like pure air and oil. Others side more gross on the foison or substance of corns and liquors, or corn itself that grows on the surface of the earth, which these fairies steal away, partly invisible, partly preying on the grain, as do crows and mice, wherefore in this same age, they are sometimes heard to bake bread, strike hammers, and do such like services within the little hillocks they most haunt, some whereof of old, before the gospel dispelled paganism, and in some barbarous places as yet, enter houses after all are at rest, and set the kitchens in order, cleansing all the vessels. Such drags go under the name of brownies. When we have plenty, they have scarcity at their homes, and on the contrary, for they are empowered to catch as much prey everywhere as they please, their robberies notwithstanding oft times occasion great ricks of corn not to bleed so well, as they call it, or prove so copious by very far as we expected by the owner. Their bodies of congealed air are sometimes carried aloft, other whiles grovel in different shapes, and enter into any cranny or cleft of the earth where air enters, to their ordinary dwellings, the earth being full of cavities and cells, and there being no place nor creature but is supposed to have other animals, greater or lesser, living in or upon it as inhabitants, and no such thing as a pure wilderness in the whole universe. Chapter 2. We then, the more terrestrial kind have now so numerously planted all countries, do labor for that abstruse people, as well as for ourselves. Albeit, when several countries were uninhabited by WS, these had their easy tillage above ground, as we now. The print of those furrows do yet remain to be seen on the shoulders of very high hills, which was done when the champaign ground was wood and forest. They removed to other lodgings at the beginning of each quarter of the year, so traversing till doomsday, being impudent and impotent of, staying in one place, and finding some ease by sojourning and changing habitations. Their chameleon-like bodies swim in the air near the earth with bag and baggage, and at such revolution of time, seers, or men of the second sight, body males being seldom so qualified, have very terrifying encounters with them, even on highways, who therefore usually shun to travel abroad at these 4 seasons of the year, and thereby have made it accustomed to this day among the Scottish Irish to keep church duly every first Sunday of the quarter to 7 or hallow themselves, their corns and cattle, from the shots and stealth of these wandering tribes, and many of these superstitious people will not be seen in church again till the next quarter begin, as if no duty were to be learned or done by them, but all the use of worship and sermons were to save them from these arrows that fly in the dark. They are distributed in tribes and orders, and have children, nurses, mariages, deaths, and burials, in appearance, even as we, unless they so do for a mock show, or to prognosticate some such things among us. Footnotes. These arrows that fly in the dark. The arrows are the ancient flint arrowheads, which Mr. Kirk later asserts to be too delicate for human artificers. On this matter Isabel Gowdy, the witch, confessed, as for elf arrows, the devil sharps them with his hand, and delivers them to elf boys, while whittleless, and dides them with a sharp thing like a packing needle, but when I was in Elfland, I saw them whittling and diding them. Isabel described the manner in which witches use this artillery, we spang them from the nails of our thumbs, and with these she and her friends shot and slew many men and women. The confessions of Isabel Gowdy are in the 3rd volume of Pitcairn's Scottish Criminal Trials. They contain little or nothing of the psychical, all is mere folklore, fairy tales, and charms derived from the old Catholic liturgy. The poor woman, having begun to fabled with manifest enjoyment and considerable power. It seems from her account that each coven, or assembly of witches, had a maiden in it, and without our maiden we could do no great thing. On the other hand, an extraordinary case of an epileptic boy, who was hurled about, and beheld distant occurrences in trance, may be read in Chambers' Domestic Annals of Scotland, 3. 449. Candles used to go out when this boy, a 3rd son of Lord Torpichen, was in the room. The date, 1720, and the place, Midlothian, prevented anyone from being burned for bewitching him. A fast was proclaimed. The boy recovered, and did good service in the navy. He is said to have been levitated frequently. Chapter 3. 3. They are clearly seen by these men of the second sight to eat at funerals and banquets, hence many of the Scottish Irish will not taste meat at these meetings, lest they have communion with, or be poisoned by, them. So are they seen to carry the bier or coffin with the core among the Middle-earth men to the grave. Some men of that exalted sight, whether by art or nature, have told me they have seen at these meetings a dowd lemon, or the shape of some man in 2 places, that is, a subterranean and a subterranean inhabitant, perfectly resembling one another in all points, whom he notwithstanding could easily distinguish one from another, by some secret tokens and operations, and so go speak to the man his neighbor and familiar, passing by the apparition or resemblance of him. They avouch that every element and different state of being have animals resembling these of another element, as there be fishes sometimes at sea resembling monks of late order in all their hoods and dresses, so is the Roman invention of good and bad demons, and guardian angels particularly assigned, is called by them an ignorant mistake, sprung only from this original. They call this reflex man a CO walker, every way like the man, as a twin brother and companion, haunting him as his shadow, as is oft seen and known among men, resembling the original, both before and after the original is dead, and was also often seen of old to enter a house, by which the people knew that the person of that likeness was to visit them within a few days. This copy, echo, or living picture, goes at last to his own herd. It accompanied that person so long and frequently for ends best known to itself, whether to guard him from the secret assaults of some of its own folks, or only as a sportful ape to counterfeit all his actions. However, the stories of old witches prove beyond contradiction, that all sorts of people, spirits which assume light airy bodies, or crazed bodies connected by foreign spirits, seem to have some pleasure, at least to assuage from pain or melancholy, by frisking and caperating like satyrs, or whistling and screeching, like unlucky birds, in their unhallowed synagogues and sabbaths. If invited and earnestly required, these companions make themselves known and familiar to men, otherwise, being in a different state and element, they neither can nor will easily converse with them. They avouch that a helo, or great eater, hath a voracious elf to be his attender, called a joint eater or just haver, feeding on the pith or quintessence of what the man eats, and that therefore he continues lean like a hawk or heron, notwithstanding his devouring appetite. Yet it would seem that they convey that substance elsewhere, for these subterraneans eat but little in their dwellings, their food being exactly clean, and served up by pleasant children, like enchanted puppets. What food they extract from us is conveyed to their homes by secret paths, as some skillful women do the pith and milk from their neighbors' cows into their own sheepfold throw a hair tedder, at a great distance, by aired magic, or by drawing a spigot fastened to a post which will bring milk as far up as a bull will be heard to roar. The chief mate of the remaining milk of a cow thus strained will swim in water like a cork. The method they take to recover their milk is a bitter chiding of the suspected enchanters, charging them by a counter charm to give them back their own, in God, or their master's name. But a little of the mother's dung stroked on the calf's mouth before it sucked any, does prevent this theft. Chapter 4. Their houses are called large and fair, and, except at some odd occasions, unperceivable by vulgar eyes, like Ratchland and other enchanted islands, having for lights continual lamps and fires, often seen without fuel to sustain them. Women are yet alive who tell they were taken away when in childbed to nurse fairy children, a lingering voracious image of them, being left in their place, like their reflection in a mirror, which, as if it were some insatiable spirit in an assumed body, made first semblance to devour the meats that it cunningly carried by, and then left the carcass as if it expired and departed thence by a natural and common death. The child, and fire, with food, and other necessaries, are set before the nurse how soon she enters, but she neither perceives any passage out, nor sees what those people died in other rooms of the lodging. When the child is weaned, the nurse dies, or is conveyed back, or gets it to her choice to stay there. But if any subterraneans be so subtle, as to practice sleights for procuring a privacy to any of their mysteries, such as making use of their ointments, which as Guy Jesus' ring makes them invisible or nimble, or casts them in a trance, or alters their shape, or makes things appear at a vast distance, they smite them without pain, as with a puff of wind, and bereave them of both the natural and acquired sights in the twinkling of an eye, both these sights, where once they come, being in the same organ and inseparable, or they strick them dumb. The Tremontans to this day put bread, the Bible, or a piece of iron, in women's beds when traveling, to save them from being thus stolen, and they commonly report that all uncouth, unknown wights are terrified by nothing earthly so much as by cold iron. They deliver the reason to be that hell lying betwixt the chill tempests, and the firebrands of scalding metals, and iron of the north, hence the lodestone causes a tendency to that point, by an antipathy thereto. These odious far-scenting creatures shrug and fright at all that comes thence relating to so abhorred a place, whence their torment is either begun, or feared to come hereafter. Chapter 5. Their apparel and speech is like that of the people and country under which they live, so are they seen to wear plaits and variegated garments in the highlands of Scotland, and swan oaks therefore in Ireland. They speak but little, and that by way of whistling, clear, not rough. The very devils conjured in any country, do answer in the language of the place, yet sometimes the subterraneans speak more distinctly than at other times. Their women are said to spine very fine, to dye, to tissue, and embroider, but whether it is as manual operation of substantial refined stuff, with apt and solid instruments, or only curious cobwebs, impalpable rainbows, and a fantastic imitation of the actions of more terrestrial mortals, since it transcended all the senses of the seer to discern whether, I leave to conjecture as I found it. Chapter 6. Their men travel much abroad, either presaging or aping the dismal and tragical actions of some amongst us, and have also many disastrous doings of their own, as convocations, fighting, gashes, wounds, and burials, both in the earth and air. They live much longer than we, yet die at last, or at least vanish from that state. 'Tis one of their tenets, that nothing perisheth, but, as the sun and year, everything goes in a circle, lesser or greater, and is renewed and refreshed in its revolutions, as 'tis another, that everybody in the creation moves, which is a sort of life, and that nothing moves, but has another animal moving on it, and so on, to the utmost minutest corpuscle that's capable to be a receptacle of life. Chapter 7. They are said to have aristocratical rulers and laws, but no discernible religion, love, or devotion towards God, the blessed maker of all. They disappear whenever they hear his name invoked, or the name of Jesus, at which all do bow willingly, or by constraint, that dwell above or beneath within the earth. Philip. 2:10. Nor can they act odd at that time after hearing of that sacred name. The depisver, or seer, that corresponds with this kind of familiars, can bring them with a spell to appear to himself or others when he pleases, as readily as ender which to those of her kind. He tells, they are ever ready to go on hurtful errands, but seldom will be the messengers of great good to men. He is not terrified with their sight when he calls them, but seeing them in a surprise, as often he does, frightens him extremely. And glad would he be quite of such, for the hideous spectacles seen among them, as the torturing of some white, earnest ghostly staring looks, skirmishes, and the like. They do not all the harm which appearingly they have power to do, nor are they perceived to be in great pain, save that they are usually silent and sullen. They are said to have many pleasant toyish books, but the operation of these pieces only appears in some paroxysms of antic jollity, as if ravished and prompted by a new spirit entering into them at that instant, lighter and merrier than their own. Other books have involved abstruse sense, much like the Rosicrucian Rosicrucian style. They have nothing of the Bible, save collected parcels for charms and counter-charms, not to defend themselves withal, but to operate on other animals, for they are a people invulnerable by our weapons, and albeit werewolves and witches true bodies are, by the union of the spirit of nature that runs through all, echoing and doubling the blow towards another, wounded at home, when the astral assumed bodies are stricken elsewhere, as the strings of a second harp, tuned to a unison, sounds. Though only aim be struck, yet these people have not a second, or so gross a body at all, to be so pierced, but as air, which when divided units again, or if they feel pain by a blow, they are better physicians than we, and quickly cure it. They are not subject to sore sicknesses, but dwindle and decay at a certain period, all about one age. Some say their continual sadness is because of their pendulous state, like those men, Luke 13:2. 6, as uncertain what at the last revolution will become of them, when they are locked up into one unchangeable condition, and if they have any frolic fits of mirth, 'tis as the constrained grinning of a moored head, or rather as acted on a stage, and moved by another, they're then, cordially coming of themselves. But other men of the second sight, being illiterate, and unwary in their observations, learn from those, want to bring those subterranean people to be departed souls, attending a while in this inferior state, and clothed with bodies procured through their alms deeds in this life, fluid, active, ethereal vehicles to hold them, that they may not scatter, or wander, and be lost in the totem, or their first nothing, but if any were so impious as to have given no alms, they say win the souls of such. Duty paired, they sleep in an inactive state till they resume in terrestrial bodies again. Others, that what the Low Country Scots calls a reed, and the Irish tape sheet or death's messenger, appearing sometimes as a little rough dog, and if crossed and conjured in time, will be pacified by the death of any other creature instead of the sick man, is only exvious fumes of the man approaching death, exhale D and congeal D into a various likeness, as ships and armies are sometimes shaft in the air, and called astral bodies, agitated as wildfire with wind, and are neither souls or counterfeiting spirits, yet not a few avouch, as is said, that surely these are a numerous people by themselves, having their own polities, which diversities of judgments may occasion several inconsonancies in this rehearsal, after the narrowest scrutiny made about it. Chapter 8. Their weapons are mostly solid earthly bodies, nothing of iron, but much of stone, like a yellow soft flint spot, shaped like a barbed arrowhead, but flung like a dart, with great force. These arms, cut by art and tools it seems beyond human, have something of the nature of thunderbolt subtlety, and mortally wounding the vital parts without breaking the skin, of which wounds I have observed in beasts, and felt them with my hands. They are not as infallible Benjamites, hitting at a hair's breadth, nor are they wholly unvanquishable, at least in appearance. The men of that second sight do not discover strange things when asked, but it fits in raptures, as if inspired with some genius at that instant, which before did lurk in or about them. Thus I have frequently spoke to one of them, who in his transport told he cut the body of one of those people in two with his iron weapon, and so escaped this onset, yet he saw nothing left behind of that appearing defeated, at other times he wrestled some of them. His neighbors often perceived this man to disappear at a certain place, and about 1 hour after to become visible, and discover himself near a bow shot from the first place. It was in that place where he became invisible, said he, that the subterraneans did encounter and combat with him. Those who are unseen or unsanctified, called Fae, are said to be pierced or wounded with those people's weapons, which makes them do somewhat very unlike their former practice, causing a sudden alteration, yet the cause thereof unperceivable at present, nor have they power, either they cannot make use of their natural powers, or ask not the heavenly aid, to escape the blow impendent. A man of the second sight perceived a person standing by him, found to others' view, wholly gored in blood, and he, amazed like, bid him instantly flee. The whole man laughs at his airt and warning, since there was no appearance of danger. He had scarcely contracted his lips from laughter, when unexpectedly his enemy leapt in at his side, and stabbed him with their weapons. They also pierce cows or other animals, usually said to be elf-shot, whose purest substance, if they die, these subterraneans take to live on, viz. The aerial and ethereal parts, the most spirituous matter for prolonging of life, such as aquavity, moderately taken, is among liquors, leaving the terrestrial behind. The cure of such hurts is, only for a man to find out the hole with his finger, as if the spirits flowing from a man's warm hand were antidote sufficient against their poisoned darts. Chapter 9. As birds and beasts, whose bodies are much used to the change of the free and open air, foresee storms, so those invisible people are more sagacious to understand by the books of nature things to come, than we, who are pestered with the grosser dregs of all elementary mixtures, and have our purer spirits choked by them. The deer scents out a man in powder, though a late invention, at a great distance. A hungry hunter, Brett, and the raven, a carrion, their brains, being long clarified by the high and subtle air, will observe a very small change in a trice. Thus a man of the second sight, perceiving the operations of these forecasting invisible people among us, indulged through a stupendous providence to give warnings of some remarkable events, either in the air, earth, or waters, told he saw a winding shroud creeping on a walking healthful person's legs till it come to the knee, and afterwards it came up to the middle, then to the shoulders, and at last over the head, which was visible to no other person. And by observing the spaces of time betwixt the several stages, he easily guessed how long the man was to live who wore the shroud, for when it approached his head, he told that such a person was ripe for the grave. Chapter 10. There are many places called fairy hills, which the mountain people think impious and dangerous to peel or discover, by taking earth or wood from them, superstitiously believing the souls of their predecessors to dwell there. And for that end, say they, a moat or mount was dedicated beside every churchyard, to receive the souls till their adjacent bodies arise, and so become as a fairy hill, they using bodies of air when called abroad. They also affirm those creatures that move invisibly in a house, and cast huge stones, but do not much hurt, because counter-wrought by some more courteous and charitable spirits that are everywhere ready to defend men. Dan 10. 13. To be souls that have not attained their rest, thorough vehement desire of revealing a murder or notable injury done or received, or a treasure that was forgotten in their lifetime on earth, which when disclosed to a conjurer alone, the ghost quite removes. In the next country to that of my former residence, about the year 1676, when there was some scarcity of grain, a marvelous elapse in vision strongly struck the imagination of two women in one night, living at a good distance from one another, about a treasure hid in a hill, called Sithruadge, or Fairy Hill. The appearance of a treasure was first represented to the fancy, and then an audible voice named the place where it was to their awakening senses. Whereupon both arose, and meeting accidentally at the place, discovered their design, and jointly digging, found a vessel as large as a Scottish peck, full of small pieces of good money, of ancient coin, which having betwixt them, they sold in dishfuls for dishfuls of meal to the country people. Very many of undoubted credit saw, and had of the coin to this day. But whether it was a good or bad angel, one of the subterranean people, or the restless soul of him who hid it, that discovered it, and to what end it was done, I leave to the examination of others. Chapter 11. These subterraneans have controversies, doubts, disputes, feuds, and siding of parties, there being some ignorance in all creatures, and the vastest created intelligence is not compassing all things. As to vice and sin, whatever their own laws be, sure, according to ours, and equity, natural, civil, and revealed D, they transgress and commit acts of injustice, and sin, by what is above said, as to their stealing of nurses to their children, and that other sort of plagiarism in catching our children away, may seem to err some estate in those invisible dominions, which never return. For the inconvenience of their succubi, who tryst with men, it is abominable, but for swearing and intemperance, they are not observed so subject to those irregularities, as to envy, spite, hypocrisy, lying, and dissimulation. Chapter 12. As our religion obliges us not to make a peremptory and curious search into these abstruseness, so that the histories of all ages give as many plain examples of extraordinary occurrences as make a modest inquiry not contemptible. How much is written of pygmies, fairies, nymphs, sirens, apparitions, which though not the 10th part true, yet could not spring of nothing. Even English authors relate, of, Berry Island, in Glamorganshire, that laying your ear into a cleft of the rocks, blowing of bellows, striking of hammers, clashing of armor, filing of iron, will be heard distinctly ever since Merlin enchant those subterranean wights to a solid manual forging of arms to Aurelius Ambrosius and his Britons, till he returned, which Merlin being killed in a battle, and not coming to loose the knot, these active Vulcans are there tied to a perpetual labor. But to dip no deeper into this well, I will next give some account how the seer my informer comes to have the secret way of correspondence beyond other mortals. There be odd solemnities at investing a man with the privileges of the whole mystery of the second sight. He must run a tether of hair, which bound a cord to the bier, in a helix about his middle, from end to end, then bow his head downwards, as did Elijah, 1 Kings, 18:42, and look back through his legs until he see a funeral advance till the people cross 2 marches, or look thus back through a hole where was a knot of fur. But if the wind changes points while the hair tether is tied about him, he is in peril of his life. The usual method for a curious person to get a transient sight of this otherwise invisible crew of subterraneans, if impotently and over rashly sought, is to put his left foot under the wizard's right foot, and the seer's hand is put on the inquirer's head, who is to look over the wizard's right shoulder, which has one ill appearance, as if by the ceremony one implicit surrender were made of all betwixt the wizard's foot and his hand, ere the person can be admitted a privado to the airt. Then will he see a multitude of wights, like furious hardy men, flocking to him hastily from all quarters, as thick as atoms in the air, which are no non-entities or phantasms, creatures proceeding from an affrighted apprehension, confused or crazed sense, but realities, appearing to a stable man in his awakening sense, and enduring a rational trial of their being. This thorough fear strikes him breathless and speechless. The wizard, defending the lawfulness of his skill, forbids such horror, and comforts his novice by telling of Zacharias, as being struck speechless at seeing apparitions, Luke 1:20. Then he further maintains his error, by vouching Elisha to have had the same, and disclosed it thus unto his servant in 2 Kings, 6:17, when he blinded the Syrians, and Peter in Act 5:9, foreseeing the death of Sapphira, by perceiving as it were her winding sheet about her beforehand, and Paul, in 2 Corinth 12:4, who got such a vision and sight as should not, nor could be told. Elisha also in his chamber saw Gehazi his servant, at a great distance, taking a reward from Naaman, 2 Kings 5:26. Hence were the prophets frequently called seers, or men of a 2D or more exalted sight than others. He acts for his purpose also Math 4:8. Where the devil undertakes to give even Jesus a sight of all nations, and the finest things in the world, at one glance, though in their natural situations and stations at a vast distance from other. And 'tis said expressly he did let sie them, not in a map it seems, nor by a fantastic magical juggling of the sight, which he could not impose upon so discovering a person. It would appear then to have been a sight of real solid substances, and things of worth, which he intended as a bait for his purpose. Whence it might seem, comparing this relation of Math 4:8 with the former, that the extraordinary or second sight can be given by the ministry of bad as well as good spirits to those that will embrace it. And the instance of Balaam and the Pythoness make it nothing the less probable. Thus also the seer trains his shoulder, by telling of the gradations of nature, ordered by a wise Providenque, that as the sight of bats and owls transcend that of shrews and moles, so the visive faculties of men are clearer than those of owls, as eagles, lynxes, and cats are brighter than men's. And again, that men of the second sight, being designed to give warnings against secret engines, surpass the ordinary vision of other men, which is a native habit in some, descended from their ancestors, and acquired as one artificial improvement of their natural sight in others, resembling in their own kind the usual artificial helps of optic glasses, as perspectives, telescopes, and microscopes, without which aesthetious aids those men here treated of do perceive things that, for their smallness or subtlety and secrecy, are invisible to others, though daily conversant with them, they having such a beam continually about them as that of the sun, which when it shines clear only, lets common eyes see the atoms, in the air, that without those rays they could not discern, for some have this second sight transmitted from father to son through the whole family, without their own consent or others' teaching, proceeding only from a bounty of providence it seems, or by compact, or by a complexion all quality of the first acquirer. As it may seem alike strange, yet nothing vicious, and such as Master Grey, the Irish stroker, seventh sons, and others that cure the king's evil, and chase away diseases and pains, with only stroking of the affected part, which, if it be not the relics of miraculous operations, or some secret virtue in the womb, of the parent, which increaseth until seventh sons be born, and decrease by the same degrees afterwards, proceeds only from the sensitive balsam of their healthful constitutions, virtue going out from them by spirituous effluxes unto the patient, and their vigorous healthy spirits affecting the sick as you swallow the unhealthy fumes of the sick infect the sound and whole. Chapter 13. The minor sword of seers prognosticate many future events, only for a month's space, from the shoulder bone of a sheep on which a knife never came, for as before is said, and the Nazarites of old had something of it, iron hinders all the operations of those that travel in the intrigues of these hidden dominions. By looking into the bone, they will tell if whoredom be committed in the owner's house, what money the master of the sheep had, if any will die out of that house for that moneth, and if any could tell there will take a trach, as if planet struck. Then they will prescribe a preservative in prevention. Chapter 14. A woman, it seems an exception from the general rule, singularly wise in these matters of foresight, living in Colisnock, an isle of the Hebrides, in the time of the Marquis of Montrose his wars with the states in Scotland, being notorious among many, and so examined by some that violently seized that isle, if she saw them coming or not. She said, she saw them coming many hours before they came in view of the isle. But earnestly looking, she sometimes took them for enemies, sometime for friends, and moreover they looked as if they went from the isle, not as men approaching it, which made her not put the inhabitants on their guard. The matter was, that the barge wherein the enemy sailed, was a little before taken from the inhabitants of that same isle, and the men had their backs towards the isle, when they were plying the oars towards it. Thus this old scout and Delphian oracle was at least deceived, and did deceive. Being asked who gave her such sights and warnings, she said, that as soon as she set 3 crosses of straw upon the palm of her hand, a great ugly beast sprang out of the earth near her, and flew in the air. If what she inquired had success according to her wish, the beast would descend calmly, and lick up the crosses. If it would not succeed, the beast would furiously thrust her and the crosses over on the ground, and so vanish to his place. Chapter 15. Among other instances of undoubted verity, proving in these the being of such aerial people, or species of creatures not vulgarly known, I add the subsequent relations, some whereof I have from my acquaintance with the actors and patients, and the rest from the eyewitnesses to the matter of fact. The first whereof shall be of the woman taken out of her child bed, and having a lingering image of her substituted body in her room, which resemblance decayed, d.y.d., and was buried. But the person stolen returning to her husband after 2 years' space, he being convinced by many undeniable tokens that she was his former wife, admitted her home, and had diverse children by her. Among other reports she gave her husband, this was one, that she perceived little what they did in the spacious house she lodged in, until she anointed one of her eyes with a certain unction that was by her, which they perceiving to have acquainted her with their actions, they found her blind of that eye with a puff of their breath. She found the place full of light, without any fountain or lamp from whence it did spring. This person lived in the country next to that of my last residence, and might furnish matter of dispute amongst casuists, whether if her husband had been married in the interim of her 2 years' absence, he was obliged to divorce from the second spouse at the return of the first. There is an art, appearingly without superstition, for recovering of such as are stolen, but think it superfluous to insert it. I saw a woman of 40 years of age, and examined her, having another clergyman in my company, about a report that passed of her long fasting. Her name is not entire. One, it was told by them of the house, as well as herself, that she took very little or no food for several years past, that she tarried in the fields overnight, saw and conversed with a people she knew not, having wandered in seeking of her sheep, and sleep tea upon a hillock, and finding herself transported to another place before day. The woman had a child since that time, and is still pretty melancholious and silent, hardly ever seen to laugh. Her natural heat and radical moisture seem to be equally balanced, like an unextinguished lamp, and going in a circle, not unlike to the faint life of bees, and some sort of birds, that sleep all the winter over, and revive in the spring. It is usually in all magical arts to have the candidates prepossessing with a belief of their tutor's skill, and ability to perform their feats, and act their juggling pranks and legerdemain, but a person called Stuart, possessed with a prejudice at that was spoken of the 2D sight, and living near to my house, was so put to it by a seer, before many witnesses, that he lost his speech and power of his legs, and breathing excessively, as if expiring, because of the many fearful wights that appeared to him. The company were forced to carry him into the house. It is notoriously known what in Killen, within Perthshire, fell tragically out with a yeoman that lived hard by, who coming into a company within an ale house, where a seer sat at table, that at the side of the entrant neighbor, the seer starting, rose to go out of the house, and being asked the reason of his hast, told that the entrant man should die within 2 days, at which news the named entrant slapped the seer, and was himself executed 2 days after for the fact. A minister, very intelligent, but misbelieving all such sights as were not ordinary, chancing to be in a narrow lane with the seer, who perceiving a wight of a known visage furiously to encounter them, the seer desired the minister to turn out of the way, who scorning his reason, and holding himself in the path with them, when the seer was going hastily out of the way, they were both violently cast aside to a good distance, and the fall made them lame for all their life. A little after the minister was carried home, one came to toll the bell for the death of the man whose representation met them in the narrow path some half an hour before. Another example is, a seer in Kintyre, in Scotland, sitting at table with divers others, suddenly did cast his head aside. The company asking him why he did it, he answered, that such a friend of his, by name, then in Ireland, threatened immediately to cast a dish full of butter in his face. The men wrote down the day and hour, and sent to the gentleman to know the truth, which deed the gentleman declared he did at that very time, for he knew that his friend was a seer, and would make sport with it. The men that were present, and examined the matter exactly, told me this story, and withal, that a seer would with all his optics perceive no other object so readily as this, at such a distance. A succinct account of my Lord Tarbot's relations in a letter to the Honourable Robert Boyle, Esquire, of the predictions made by seers, whereof himself was ear and eyewitness. I thought fit to adjoin it hereunto, that I might not be thought singular in this disquisition, that the matter of fact might be undeniably made out, and that I might, with all submission, give annotations, with animadversions, on his supposed causes of that phenomenon, with my reasons of dissent from his judgment. Sir, I heard very much, but believed very little, of the second sight, yet its being assumed by several of great veracity, I was induced to make inquiry after it in the year 1652, being then confined to abide in the north of Scotland by the English usurpers. The more general accounts of it were, that many Highlanders, yet far more Icelanders, were qualified with this second sight, that men, women, and children, indistinctly, were subject to it, and children, where parents were not. Sometimes people came of age, who had it not when young, nor could any tell by what means produced. It is a trouble to most of them who are subject to it, and they would be rid of it any rate if they could. The sight is of no long duration, only continuing so long as they can keep their eyes steady without twinkling. The hardy therefore fix their look, that they may see the longer, but the timorous see only glances, their eyes always twinkles at the first sight of the object. That which generally is seen by them, are the species of living creatures, and of inanimate things, which was in motion, such as ships, and habits upon persons. They never see the species of any person who is already dead. What they foresee fails not to exist in the mode, and in that place where it appears to them. They cannot well know what space of time shall intervene between the apparition and the real existence, but some of the hardiest and longest experience have some rules for conjectures, as, if they see a man with a shrouding sheet in the apparition, they will conjecture at the nearness or remoteness of his death by the more or less of his body that is covered by it. They will ordinarily see their absent friends, though at a great distance, sometimes no less than from America to Scotland, sitting, standing, or walking in some certain place, and then they conclude with the assurance that they will see them so and there. If a man be in love with a woman, they will ordinarily see the species of that man standing by her, and so likewise if a woman be in love, and they conjecture at their enjoyments, of each other, by the species touching, of, the person, or appearing at a distance from her, if they enjoy not one another. If they see the species of any person who is sick to die, they see them covered over with the shrouding sheet. These generals I had verified to me by such of them as did see, and were esteemed honest and sober by all the neighborhood, for I inquired after such for my information. And because there were more of these seers in the Isles of Lewis, Harris, and Uist, than in any other place, I did entreat Sir James M. Donald, who is now dead, Sir Norman M. Loud, and Mr. Daniel Morrison, a very honest person, who are still alive, to make inquiry in this uncouth sight, and to acquaint me therewith, which they did, and all found an agreement in these generals, and informed me of many instances confirming what they said. But though men of discretion and honor, being but a 2D hand, I will choose rather to put myself than my friends on the hazard of being laughed at for incredible relations. I was once traveling in the Highlands, and a good number of servants with me, as is usual there, and one of them going a little before me, entering into a house where I was to stay all night, and going hastily to the door, he suddenly stepped back with a screech, and did fall by a stone, which hit his foot. I asked what the matter was, for he seemed to be very frightened. He told me very seriously that I should not lodge in that house, because shortly a dead coffin would be carried out of it, for many were carrying of it when he was heard cry. I neglected his words, and staying there, he said to other of his servants, he was sorry for it, and that surely what he saw would shortly come to pass. Though no sick person was then there, yet the landlord, a healthy Highlander, died of an apoplectic fit before I left the house. In the year 1653, Alexander Monroe, afterward lieutenant colonel to the Earl of Dunbarton's regiment, and I were walking in a place called Ullabill, in Lochbroom, on a little plain, at the foot of a rugged hill. There was a servant working with a spade in the walk before us, his back was to us, and his face to the hill. Before we came to him, he let the spade fall, and looked toward the hill. He took notice of us as we passed nearby him, which made me look at him, and perceiving him to stare a little strangely, I conjectured him to be a seer. I called to him, at which he started and smiled. "What are you doing?" said I. He answered, "I have seen a very strange thing, an army of Englishmen, leading of horses, coming down that hill, and a number of them are coming down to the plain, and eating the barley, which is growing in the field near to the hill." This was on the May 4th, for I noted the day, and it was 4 or 5 days before the barley was sown in the field he spoke of. Alexander Monroe asked him how he knew they were Englishmen. He said, because they were leading of horses, and had on hats and boots, which he knew no Scot man would have there. We took little notice of the whole story, as other than a foolish vision, but wished that an English party were there, we being then at war with them, and the place almost inaccessible for horsemen. But in the beginning of August thereafter, the Earl of Middleton, then lieutenant for the king in the Highlands, having occasion to march a party of his toward the South Highlands, he sent his foot through a place called Inverlall, and the foreparty which was first down the hill, did fall off eating the barley which was on the little plain under it. And Monroe calling to NYND what the seer told us, in May preceding, he wrote of it, and sent an express to me to Loxlin, in Ross, where I then was, with it. I had occasion once to be in company where a young lady was, excuse my not naming of persons, and I was told there was a notable seer in the company. I called him to speak with me, as I did ordinarily when I found any of them, and after he had answered me to several questions, I asked if he knew any person to be in love with that lady. He said he did, but he knew not the person, for during the 2 days he had been in her company, he perceived one standing near her, and his head leaning on her shoulder, which he said did foretell that the man should marry her, and die before her, according to his observation. This was in the year 1655. I desired him to describe the person, which he did, so that I could conjecture, by the description, of such a one, who was of that lady's acquaintance, though there was no thought of their marriage till 2 years thereafter. And having occasion, in the year 1657, to find this seer, who was an islander, in company with the other person whom I conjectured to have been described by him, I called him aside, and asked if that was the person he saw beside the lady near 2 years then past. He said it was he indeed, for he had seen that lady just then standing by him hand in hand. This was some few months before their marriage, and that man is since dead, and the lady still alive. I shall trouble you but with one more, which I thought most remarkable of any that occurred to me. In January 1652, the above-mentioned lieutenant, Call. Alex. Monroe and I happened to be in the house of one W.M. M. Cletted of Farranley, in the county of Ross. He, the landlord, and I were sitting in 3 chairs near the fire, and in the corner of the great chimney there were 2 Icelanders, who were that very night come to the house, and were related to the landlord. While the one of them was talking with Monroe, I perceived the other to look oddly toward me. From this look, and his being an islander, I conjectured him a seer, and asked him, at what he stared. He answered, by desiring me to rise from that chair, for it was an unlucky one. I asked him why. He answered, because there was a dead man in the chair next to me. Well, said I, if it be in the next chair, I may keep mine own. But what is the likeness of the man? He said he was a tall man, with a long grey coat, booted, and one of his legs hanging over the arm of the chair, and his head hanging dead to the other side, and his arm backward, as if it were broken. There were some English troops then quartered near that place, and there being at that time a great frost after a thaw, the country was covered all over with this. 4 or 5 of the English riding by this house some 2 hours after the vision, while we were sitting by the fire, we heard a great noise, which proved to be those troopers, with the help of other servants, carrying in one of their number, who had got a very mischievous fall, and had his arm broke, and falling frequently in swooning fits, they brought him into the hall, and set him in the very chair, and in the very posture that the seer had prophesied. But the man did not die, though he recovered with great difficulty. Among the accounts given me by Sir Norman M. Cludd, there was one worth of special notice, which was thus. There was a gentleman in the Isle of Harris, who was always seen by the seers with an arrow in his thigh. Such in the Isle who thought those prognostications infallible, did not doubt but he would be shot in the thigh before he died. Sir Norman told me that he heard it the subject of their discourse for many years. At last he died without any such accident. Sir Norman was at his burial, at St. Clement's Church in the Harris. At the same time, the corpse of another gentleman was brought to be buried in the same very church. The friends on either side came to debate who should first enter the church, and in a trice from words they came to blows. One of the numbers, who was armed with bow and arrows, let one fly among them. Now every family in that isle have their burial place in the church in stone chests, and the bodies are carried in open biers to the burial place. Sir Norman having appeased the tumult, one of the arrows was found shot in the dead man's thigh. To this Sir Norman was a witness. In the account which Mr. Daniel Morrison, parson in the Lewis, gave me, there was one, though it be heterogeneous from the subject, yet it may be worth your notice. It was of a young woman in his parish, who was mightily frightened by seeing her own image still before her, always when she came to the open air, the back of the image being always to her, so that it was not a reflection as in a mirror, but the species of such a body as her own, and in a very like habit, which appeared to herself continually before her. The parson kept her a long while with him, but had no remedy of her evil, which troubled her exceedingly. I was told afterwards, that when she was 4 or 5 years elder she saw it not. These are matters of fact, which I assure you they are truly related. But these, and all others that occurred to me, by information or otherwise, could never lead me into a remote conjecture of the cause of so extraordinary a phenomenon. Whether it be equality in the eyes of some people into these parts, concurring with equality in the air also, whether such species be everywhere, though not seen by the want of eyes so qualified, or from whatever other cause, I must leave to the inquiry of clearer judgments than mine. But a hint may be taken from this image which appeared still to this woman above mentioned, and from another mentioned by Aristotle, in the 4th of his Metaphysics, if I remember right, for it is long since I read it is also from the common opinion that young infants, unsullied with many objects, do sie apparitions, which were not seen by those of elder years, as likewise from this, that Severals did sie the second sight when in the Highlands or Isles, yet when transported to live in other countries, especially in America, they quite lose this quality, as was told me by a gentleman who knew some of them in Barbados, who did see no vision there, although he knew them to be seers when they lived in the Isles of Scotland. Conclusions. My lord, after narrow inquisition, hath delivered many true and remarkable observes on this subject, yet to encourage a further scrutiny, I crave leave to say. 1. That but a few women are endued with this sight in respect of men, and their predictions not so certain. 2. This sight is not criminal, since a man can come by it unawares, and without his consent, but it is certain he see more fatal and fearful things than he do gladsome. 3. The seers avouch, that Severals who go to the Siths, or people at rest, and, in respect of us, in peace, before the natural period of their life expire, do frequently appear to them. For a vehement desire to attain this art is very helpful to the inquirer, and the species of an absent friend, which appears to the seers, as clearly as if he had sent his lively picture to present itself before him, is no fantastic shadow of a sick apprehension, but a reality, and a messenger, coming for unknown reasons, not from the original similitude of itself, but from a more swift and pragmatic people, which recreate themselves in offering secret intelligence to men, though generally they are unacquainted with that kind of correspondence, as if they had lived in a different element from them. 5. Though my collections were written long before I saw my lord of Tarbets, yet I am glad that his descriptions in mine correspond so closely. The maid my lord mentions, who saw her image still before her, stood with the CO walker named in my account, which though some, at first thought, might conjecture to be by the refraction of a cloud or mist, as in the grillage, the whole air and every drop of water being a mirror to return the species of things, were our visive faculty sharp enough to apprehend them, or a natural reflection, from the same reasons that an echo can be redoubled by art, yet it were more feasible to impute this second sight to a quality infused into the eye by an unction, for witches have a sleepy ointment, that, when applied, troubles their fantasies, advancing it to have unusual figures and shapes represented to it, as if it were a fit of fanaticism, hypochondriac melancholy, or possession of some insinuating spirit, raising the soul beyond its common strain, if the palpable instances in reality seen, and innocently objected to the senses did not disprove it, make the matter of palpable verity, and no deception. Yet since this sight can be bestowed without ointment, or dangerous compact, the qualification is not of so bad an original. Therefore, 6. By my lord's good leave, I presume to say, that this sight can be no quality of the air nor of the eyes, because, 1. Such as live in the same air, and sie all other things as far off and as clearly, yet have not the second sight. A seer can give another person this sight transiently, by putting his hand and foot in the posture he requires of him. 3. The unsullied eyes of infants can naturally perceive no new unaccustomed objects, but what appear to other men, unless exalted and clarified some way, as Balaam's ass for a time, though in a witch's eye the beholder cannot see his own image reflected, as in the eyes of other people, so that defective objects, as well as diversities of the subject, may appear differently on several tempers and ages. 4. Though also some are of so venomous a constitution, by being eradicated in envy and malice, that they pierce and kill, like a cockatrice, whatever creature they first set their eye on in the morning, so was it with Walter Graham, sometime living in the Feroce wherein now I am, who killed his own cow after commending its fatness, and shot a hare with his eyes, having praised its swiftness, such was the infection of an evil eye albeit this was unusual, yet he saw no object but what was obvious, to other men as well as to himself. 5. If the being transported to live in another country did obscure the second sight, neither the parson nor the maid needed be much troubled for her reflex self, a little peregrination, and going from her wonted home, would have solved her fear. 7. Since the things seen by the seers are real entities, the presages and predictions found true, but a few endued with this sight, and those not of bad leaves, or addicted to molly vices, the true solution of the phenomenon seems rather to be the courteous endeavors of our fellow creatures in the invisible world to convince us, in opposition to Sagists, Socinians, and atheists, of a deity, of spirits, of a possible and harmless method of correspondence betwixt men and them, even in this life, of their operation for our caution and warning, of the orders and degrees of angels, whereof one order, with bodies of air condensed and curiously shaped, may be next to man, superior to him in understanding, yet unconfirmed, and of their region, habitation, and influences on man, greater than that of stars on inanimate bodies, a knowledge, belike, reserved for these last atheistic ages, wherein the profanity of men's lives hath debauched and blinded their understanding, as to Moses, Jesus, and the prophets. Unless they get convictions from things formerly known, as from the regions of the dead, nor doth the ceasing of the visions, upon the seer's transmigration into foreign kingdoms, make his lordship's conjecture of the quality of the air and eye white, while JBH, the more probable, but, on the contrary, it confirms greatly my account of an invisible people, guardian over and careful of men, who have their different offices and abilities in distinct countries, as appears in Dan 10. 13 viz. About Israel's, Grecia's, and Persia's assistant princes, whereof whoso prevaileth giveth dominion and ascendant to his pupils and vassals over the opposite armies and countries, so that every country and kingdom having their topical spirits, or powers assisting and governing them, the Scottish seer banished to America, being a stranger there, as well to the invisible as to the visible inhabitants, and wanting a familiarity of his former correspondence, he could not have the favor and warnings by the several visions and predictions which were wont to be granted him by these acquaintances and favorites in his own country. For if what he wont to sie were realities, as I have made appear, 'twere too great an honor for Scotland to have such seldom seen watchers and predominant powers over it alone, acting in it so expressly, and all other nations wholly destitute of the like, though, without all peradventure, all other people wanted the right key of their cabinet, and the exact method of correspondence with them, except the sagacious active Scots, as many of them have retained it of a long time, and by surprises and raptures do often foretell what in kindness is really represented to them at several occasions. To which purpose the learned links EYD Mr. Baxter, on Revelation 12. 7 writing of the fight betwixt Michael and the dragon, gives a very pertinent note, viz. That he knows not but where any great action, especially trade call, is done on earth, that first the battle and victory is acted and achieved in the air betwixt the good and evil spirits, thus he. It seems these were the men's guardians, and the like battles are oft times perceived in aloft in the night time, the event of which might easily be represented by some one of the number to a correspondent on earth, as frequently the report of great actions have been more swiftly carried to other countries than all the art of us mortals could possibly dispatch it. St. Austin, on Mark, 9.4. Giveth no small intimation of this truth, averring that Elias appeared with Jesus on the mount in his proper body, but Moses in an aerial body, assumed like the angels who appeared, and had ability to eat with Abraham, though no necessity on the account of their bodies. As likewise the late doctrine of the pre-existence of souls, living into aerial vehicles, gives a singular hint of the possibility of the thing, if not a direct proof of the whole assertion, which yet moreover may be illuminated by diverse other instances of the like nature, and is wonderful, besides what is above said. As 8. The invisible whites which haunt houses seem rather to be some of our subterranean inhabitants, which appear often to men of the second sight, than evil spirits or devils, because, though they throw great stones, pieces of earth and wood, at the inhabitants, they hurt them not at all, as if they acted not maliciously, like devils at all, but in sport, like buffoons and drolls. All ages have afforded some obscure testimonies of it, as Pythagoras his doctrine of transmigration, Socrates' daemon that gave him warning of future dangers, Plato's classing them into various vehiculated species of spirits, Dionysius Areopagitas marshalling 9 orders of spirits, superior and subordinate, the poets their borrowing of the philosophers, and adding their own fancies of fountain, river, and sea nymphs, wood, hill, and mountain inhabitants, and that every place and thing in cities and countries, had special invisible regular gods and governors. Cardan speaks of his father as seeing the species of his friend, in a moon-shyn night, riding fiercely by his window on a white horse, the very night his friend died at a vast distance from him, by which he understood that some alteration would suddenly ensue. Cornelius Agrippa, and the learned Dr. Moore, have several passages tending that way. The noctambulos themselves would appear to have some foreign joking spirit possessing and supporting them, when they walk on deep waters and tops of houses without danger, when asleep and in the dark, for it was no way probable that their apprehension, and strong imagination setting the animal spirits a work to move the body, could preserve it from sinking in the deep, or falling down headlong, when asleep, any more than when awake, the body being then as ponderous as before, and it is hard to attribute it to a spirit flatly evil and enemy to man, because the noctambulo returns to his own place safe. And the most furious tribe of the demons are not permitted by Providence to attack men so frequently either by night or by day, for in our highlands, as there may be many fair ladies of this aerial order, which do often tryst with lascivious young men, in the quality of succubi, or lightsome paramours and strumpets, called mean names or familiar spirits, in Deuter. 1811, so do many of our highlanders, as if strangled by the nightmare, pressed with fear. Dream, or rather possessed by one of our aerial neighbors, rise up fierce in the night, and apprehending the nearest weapons, do push and thrust at all persons in the same room with them, sometimes wounding their own comrades to death. The like whereof fell sadly out within a few miles of me at the writing, hereof I add but one instance more, of a very young maid, who lived near to my last residence, that in one night learned a large piece of poesy, by the frequent repetition of it, from one of our nimble and courteous spirits, whereof a part was pious, the rest superstitious, for I have a copy of it, and no other person was ever heard to repeat it before, nor was the maid capable to compose it of herself. 9. He demonstrated and made evident to sense this extraordinary vision of our Tremontan seers, and what is seen by them, by what is said above, many having seen the same spectres and apparitions at once, having their visive faculties entire, for non est disputandum de gusto. It now remains to shew that it is not unfutable to reason nor the Holy Scriptures. First, that it is not repugnant to reason, doeth appear from this, that it is no less strange for immortal sparks and souls to come and be immersed into gross terrestrial elementary bodies, and be so propagated, so nourished, so fed, so clothed as they are, and breathe in such an air and world prepared for them, than for Hollanders or hollow cavern inhabitants to live and traffic among us, in another state of being, without our knowledge. For Raymond de Subinda, in his 3D book, chap 12, argues quaintly, that all sorts of living creatures have a happy rational polity of their own, with great contentment, which government and mutual converse of theirs they all pride and plumb themselves, because it is as unknown to man, as man is to them. Much more, that the son of the highest spirit should assume a body like ours, convinces all the world that no other thing that is possible needs be much wondered at. To the Manicodyta, or bird of paradise, living in the highest region of the air, common birds in the second region, flies and insects in the lowest, men and beasts on the earth's surface, worms, otters, badgers, in waters, likewise hell is inhabited at the center, and heaven in the circumference, can we then think the middle cavities of the earth empty? I have seen in Weems, a place in the county of Fife, in Scotland, divers caves cut out as vast temples underground, the like is a county of England, in Malta is a cave, wherein stones of a curious cut are thrown in great numbers every day, so I have had barbed arrowheads of yellow flint, that could not be cut so small and neat, of so brittle a substance, by all the art of man. It would seem therefore that these mentioned works were done by certain spirits of pure organs, and not by devils, whose continual torments could not allow them so much pleasure. Besides these, I have found thief curiosities in Scotland, not much observed to be elsewhere. 1. The brownies, who in some families are drudges, clean the houses and dishes after all go to bed, taking with him his portion of food and removing before daybreak. 2. The mason word, which though some make a mystery of it, I will not conceal a little of what I know. It is like a rabbinical tradition, in way of comment on Jachin and Boaz, the two pillars erected in Solomon's temple, 1 Kings, 7. 21, with an addition of some secret sinew delivered from hand to hand, by which they know and become familiar one with another. 3. This second sight, so largely treated of before. 4. Charms, and curing by them very many diseases, sometimes by transferring the sickness to another. 5. A being proof of lead, iron, and silver or breech making men invulnerable. Divers of our Scottish commanders and soldiers have been seen with blue marks only, after they were shot with leaden balls, which seems to be an Italian trick, for they seem to be a people too curious and magically inclined. Finally Irismen, our northern Scottish, and our Athol men are so much addicted to and delighted with harps and music, as if, like King Saul, they were possessed with a foreign spirit, only with this difference, that music did put Saul's playfellow asleep, but roused and awaked our men, vanquishing their own spirits at pleasure, as if they were impotent of its powers, and unable to command it, for we have seen some poor beggars of them, chattering their teeth for cold, that how soon they saw the fire, and heard the harp, leapt through the house like goats and satyrs. As there are parallel stories in all countries and ages reported of these our obscure people, which are no dotages, so is it no more of necessity to us fully to know their beings and manner of life, than to understand distinctly the politic of the noon orders of angels, or with what oil the lamp of the sun is maintained so long and regularly, or why the moon is called a great luminary in scripture, while it only appears to be so, or if the moon be truly inhabited, because telescopes discover seas and mountains in it, as well as flaming furnaces in the sun, or why the discovery of America was looked on as a fairy tale, and the reporters hooted at as inventors of ridiculous utopias, or the first probable asserters punished as inventors of new gods and worlds, or why in England the king cures the struma by stroking, and the seventh son in Scotland, whither his temperat complexion conveys a balsam, and sucks out the corrupting principles by a frequent warm sanative contact. Or whither the parents of the seventh child put forth a more eminent virtue to his production than to all the rest, as being the certain meridian in height to which their vigor ascends, and from that firth have a gradually declining into a feebleness of the body in its production. And then, 1. Why is not the seventh son infected himself by that contagion he extracts from another? 2. How can continual stroking with a cold hand have so strong a natural operation, as to exhale all the infection's warming corroding vapors? 3. Why may not a seventh daughter have the same virtue? So that it appears, albeit, a happy natural constitution concur, yet something in it above nature. Therefore every age hath left some secret for its discovery, who knows but this intercourse betwixt the two kinds of rational inhabitants of the same earth may be not only believed shortly, but is freely entertained, and as well known, as now the art of navigation, printing, limbing, riding on saddles with stirrups, and the discoveries of microscopes, which were sometimes a great wonder, and is hard to be believed. 10 Though I will not be so curious nor so peremptory as he who will prove the possibility of the philosopher's stone from scripture, Job 28. 1-2. Job 22. 24-25, or the plurality of worlds, from John 14. 2 in Hebrews 2. 3. Nor the circulation of blood from Ecclesiastes 12. And 6. Nor the talismanical air, from the blind and lame mentioned in 2d of Samuel, 5. 6. Yet I humbly propose these passages which may give some light to our subject at least, and show that this polity and rank of people is not a thing impossible, nor the modest and innocent scrutiny of them impertinent or unsafe. The legion or brigade of spirits, mentioned Mark, 5. 10. Besought our Savior not to send them away out of the country, which shows they were demons loci, topical spirits, and peculiar superintendents and supervisors assigned to that province. And the power over the nations granted, Revelation 2. 26. To the conquerors of vice and infidelity, sound somewhat to that purpose. Tobit had a daemon attending marriage, chap 6. Verse 15, and in Matt 4 and 5. An evil spirit came in a visible shape to tempt our Savior, who himself denied not the sensible appearing of ghosts to our sight, but said, their bodies were not composed of flesh and bones, as ours, Luke 24:39. And in Philip 2:10. Our very subterraneans are expressly said to bow to the name of Jesus. Elisha, not intellectually only, but sensibly, saw Gehazi when out of the reach of an ordinary view. It wants not good evidence that there are more managed by God's spirits, good, evil, and intermediate spirits, among men in this world, than we are aware of, the good spirits ingesting fair and heroic apprehensions and images of virtue in the divine life, thereby animating us to act for a higher happiness, according to our improvement, and relinquishing us as strangely upon our neglect, or our embracing the deceitful serene-like pictures and representations of pleasures and gains, presented to our imaginations by evil and sportful angels, to allure to an unthinking, ungenerous, and sensual life, none of them having power to compel us to any misdemeanor without our flat consent. Moreover, this life of ours being called a warfare, and God saying that at last there will be no peace to the wicked, our bussy and silent companions also being called Siths, or people at rest and quiet, in respect of us, and without many ghosts appearing to men that want this second sight, in the very shapes, and speaking the same language, they did when incorporate and alive with us, a matter that is of an old and prescriptible tradition, our Highlanders making still a distinction betwixt Slax Galta and Slax Sith, averring that the souls go to the Sith when dislodged, many real treasures and murders being discovered by souls that pass from among ourselves, or by the kindness of these our airy neighbors, none of which spirits can be altogether inorganical. No less than the conceits about purgatory, or a state of rescue, the limbus patrum et and phantom, inventions, which though misapplied, yet are not chimeras, and altogether groundless. For Origine, it is nothing but blanch and faint discoveries of this secret republic of ours here treated on, and additional fictions of monks doting and crazed heads, our creed saying that our Savior descended Epsilon Delta Omicron Upsilon, to the invisible place and people. And many divines supposing that the deity appeared in a visible shape seen by Adam in the cool of the day, and speaking to him with an audible voice. And Jesus, probably by the ministry of invisible attendants, conveying more meat of the same kind to the few thousand that was fed by him with a very few loaves and fishes, for a new creation it was not. The Zitjim and Oakham, in Isa 13. 21-22. These satyrs, and doleful unknown creatures of islands and deserts, seem to have a plain prospect that way. Finally, the eternal happiness enjoyed in the 3D heavens, being more mysterious than most of men take it to be. It is not a sense wholly adduced to Scripture to say, that this sight, and the due objects of it, hath some vestige in holy right, but rather 'tis modestly deduced from it. 11. It only now remains to answer the obvious objections against the reality and lawfulness of this speculation. Question 1. How do you solve the second sight from compact and witchcraft? Answer. Though this correspondence with the intermediate unconfirmed people, betwixt man and angel, be not ordinary to all of us who are subterraneans, yet this sight falling some persons by accident, and its being connatural to others from their birth, the derivation of it cannot always be wicked. A too great curiosity, indeed, to acquire any unnecessary art, may be blameworthy, but divers of the secret Commonwealth may, by permission, discover themselves as innocently to us, who are in another state, as some of us men do to fishes, which are in another element, when we plunge and dive into the bottom of the seas, their native region, and in process of time we may come to converse as familiarly with these nimble and agile clans, but with greater pleasure and profit, as we do now with the Chinos antipodes. Question 2. Are they subject to vice, lusts, passion, and injustice, as we who live on the surface of the earth? Answer. The seers tell us that these wandering aerial people have not such an impetus and fatal tendency to any vice as men, as not being drenched into so gross and dready bodies as we, but yet are in an imperfect state, and some of them making better essays for heroic actions than others, having the same measures of virtue and vice as we, and still expecting advancement to a higher and more splendid state of life. One of them is stronger than many men, yet do not incline to hurt mankind, except by commission for a gross misdemeanor, as the destroying angel of Egypt, and the Assyrians, Exodus 12. 29 2 Kings, 10. 35. They haunt most where is most barbarity, and therefore our ignorant ancestors, to prevent the insults of that strange people, used as root and course a remedy, such as exorcisms, donations, and vows, but how soon ever the true piety prevailed in any place, it did not put the inhabitants beyond the reach and authority of these subtle inferior CO inhabitants and colleagues of ours, the Father of all spirits, and the person himself, having the only command of his soul and actions, a concurrence. They may have to what is virtuously done, for upon committing of a foul deed, one will find a demur upon his soul, as if his cheerful colleague had deserted him. Question 3. Do these fairy tribes procreate? If so, how are they nourished, and at what period of time do they die? Answer. Supposing all spirits to be created at once in the beginning, souls to pre-exist and to circle about into several states of probationship, to make them either totally inexcusable, or perfectly happy against the last day, solves all the difficulties. But in very deed, and speaking suitable to the nature of things, there is no more absurdity for a spirit to inform an infant in body of airs, than a body composed of dull and drossy earth. The best of spirits have always delighted more to appear into aerial, than into terrestrial bodies. They feed most what on quintessences, and ethereal essences. The pith and spirits only of women's milk feed their children, being artificially conveyed, as air and oil sink into our bodies, to make them vigorous and fresh. And this shorter way of conveying a pure aliment, without the usual digestions, by transfusing it, and transpiring through the pores into the veins, arteries, and vessels that supply the body, is nothing more absurd, than an infant's being fed by the navel before it is born, or than a plant, which grow by attracting a lively juice from the earth through many small roots and tendons, whose coarser parts be adapted and made connatural to the whole, doth quickly coalesce by the ambient cold. And so are condensed and baked up into a confirmed wood in the one, and solid body of the flesh and bone in the other. A notion which, if entertained and approved, may shew that the late invention of soaking and transfusing, not blood, but ethereal virtual spirits, may be useful both for nourishment and health. whereof is a vestige in the damnable practice of evil angels, their sucking of blood and spirits out of witches' bodice, till they drew them into a deformity and dry leanness, to side their own vehicles withal, leaving what we call the witch's mark behind, a spot that I have seen, as a small mole, horny, and brown-colored, through which mark, when a large brass pin was thrust, both in buttock, nose, and roof of the mouth, till it bowed and become crooked, the witches, both men and women, neither felt the pain, nor did bleed, nor knew the precise time when this was doing to them, their eyes only being covered. Now the air being a body as well as earth, no reason can be given why there may not be particles of more vivific spirit formed of it for procreation, than is possible to be of earth, which takes more time and pains to rarefy and ripen it, ere it can come to have a prolific virtue. And if our aping darlings did not thus procreate, their whole number would be exhausted after a considerable space of time. For though they are of more refined bodies and intellectuals than we, and of far less heavy and corruptive humors, which cause a dissolution, yet many of their lives being dissonant to right reason and their own laws, and their vehicles not being wholly free of lust and passion, especially of the more spiritual and hotisons they pass, after a long healthy life, into one orb and receptacle fitted for their degree, till they come under the general cognizance of the last day. Question 4. Doth the acquiring of this second sight make any change on the acquirer's body, mind, or actions? Answer. All uncouth sights enfeebles the seer. Daniel, though familiar with divine visions, yet fell frequently down without strength, when dazzled with a power which had the ascendant of, and passed on him beyond his comprehension. Chap 10. 8:17. So our seer is put in a rapture, transport, and sword of death, as divested of his body and all its senses, when he is first made participant of this curious piece of knowledge, but it makes no room for strain in the understanding of any, only to the fancies of clownish or illiterate men, it creates some affrightments and disturbances, because of the strongness of the shows, and their unacquaintedness with them. And as for their life, the persons endued with this rarity are, for the most part, candid, honest, and sociable people. If any of them be subject to immoralities, this abstruse skill is not to be blamed for it, for unless themselves be the tempters, the colonies of the invisible plantations, with which they intercommune, do provoke them by no villainy or mollifice, neither at their first acquaintance nor after a long familiarity. Question 5. Doth not Satan interpose in such cases by many subtle unthought insinuations, as to him who let the fly, or familiar, go out of the box, and yet found the fly of his own putting in, as serviceable as the other would have been? Answer. The goodness of the life, and designs of the ancient prophets and seers, was one of the best proofs of their mission.